welcome to the deep dive. Today we are opening up a really complex and, frankly, alarming set of sources. It's all about the case of Dr. Chen Jiguan, a complex systems scientist who was arrested and imprisoned.
And this deep dive is so important because it's not just a story about one person. We have everything here. Detailed legal opinions, the defendant's own defense, what the sources are calling his blood letter, and some really high-level academic critiques.
Where they pull in everything from chaos theory to legal philosophy.
Everything.
So our mission today is to take all this material and really try to understand how one single conviction under this incredibly vague charge of seeking trouble and provoking trouble can, well, how it can reflect a huge systemic failure.
And that age-old struggle for, intellectual freedom, the basic facts are really crucial to just lay out up front. Dr. Chen has a PhD in physics. His focus is nonlinear complex systems. He was arrested in Kunming in 2022.
For what exactly?
For content he posted on Twitter, and not just recently, but over a 3-year period. He was ultimately sentenced to 1 year and 8 months. Wow.
And the sources frame this as a collision between abstract, critical thought and a very rigid, simplifying power structure. What you see across the whole process is what one analysis calls a legal error chain. It violates the core principles of a fair trial at almost every single step.
Okay, so let's unpack that error chain. Let's start with what the sources call the faulty foundations of the prosecution's case. For the state to convict someone for seeking trouble for something they said online, there were specific legal elements they had to prove, right?
3 of them, specifically. And according to the judicial interpretations, they had to prove, 1, that the information was demonstrably false.
Okay, so not just an opinion, but factually false.
Exactly. 2, the defendant had to knowingly spread it. So there's an intent element there. And 3rd, it had to cause serious disorder of public order.
A serious disorder.
And this is where all the sources we looked at, they're all on the same page. The prosecution's argument and then the court's judgment, it just failed profoundly on all 3 counts. So let's start with the first one, the factual weakness. I mean, when you look at what this so-called false information actually was, it sounds less like a malicious rumor and more like, well, just opinion.
That's the heart of it. That's the prosecution's weakest link. So much of the content wasn't even verifiable fact in the first place. It included things like political commentary, academic essays, even a political cartoon.
A cartoon?
Right. And the defense made the point correctly that this kind of expression, it lacks what they call verifiable falseness. I mean, you can't criminally prosecute someone for a political viewpoint just because a judge happens to disagree with it.
And wasn't some of this information stuff that Dr. Chen hadn't even created himself?
Precisely. Some of the supposedly inflammatory content had already been circulated by mainstream channels, even official ones. One piece of information was sourced directly from the U.S. Embassy's account.
So if it's already out there, how can it be a criminal rumor designed to cause chaos? The whole premise just kind of falls apart.
It completely collapses. The defense argued this was protected speech and it was totally devoid of any intent to cause actual harm.
Okay, so if they couldn't prove the information was false, how in the world did they prove the second part? That he knowingly intended to spread it. This is where the logic seems to take a really bizarre turn.
It does. This is the core of the problem. They basically bypassed the need to prove his subjective intent, and they did it by introducing what the sources are calling identity-based guilt presumption.
Identity-based guilt, what does that mean?
The trial judge claimed that because Dr. Chen has a high educational background, a PhD in physics, he should be able to discern right from wrong. And therefore, the judge just concluded he must have known the information was false or dangerous.
Wait, hold on a second. So the very thing that defines him as a scholar, his intellect, his ability to think critically, that was used as evidence of his guilt.
It was weaponized against him. One analysis calls it an anti-intellectual judicial logic. It's an illegal shift of the burden of proof. The prosecution didn't have to prove he intended anything. They pointed to his diploma.
That's a complete violation of the presumption of innocence. He's being asked to prove that his own intelligence didn't lead him to have criminal intent. It's backwards.
Completely. And then the procedural failures just piled on top of this. The trial wasn't public. He couldn't effectively defend himself. He was told to just answer yes or no sometimes.
And then the appeal. What happened there? How did that seal this error chain, as you called it?
The appeals court, it committed the final fatal error. They rejected his appeal without even holding an open hearing, and their reason was that the defendant, who is in prison, had not submitted new evidence to prove his appeal. Reasons were valid.
That's unbelievable. So they're telling a person who's locked away with no resources, it's now your job to prove the entire system that convicted you was wrong.
Exactly. It flips the entire burden of proof onto the person who's in the worst possible position to carry it, the imprisoned defendant. It basically eliminates the whole purpose of an appeals court, which is to correct errors from lower courts.
Right. It feels like the system is just closing ranks.
The sources see it as the system deliberately shutting down its own self-correction mechanism.
That structural weakness is a perfect transition to our second segment. This is where things get really fascinating because Dr. Chen's own professional work becomes part of the story. The sources use complex systems and chaos theory to critique the court's actions. What can scientists like Prigozhin and Lorenz tell us about this case?
They tell us that the court tried to solve a chaotic, complex problem with a very rigid, linear tool. Social systems, the internet, even the legal system itself. These are what scientists call nonlinear, open, adaptive, complex systems.
Okay, so they're messy and unpredictable.
Deeply unpredictable. But the court's response was super simple, super linear. Like, if A happens, then B must follow, and that will cause C. The sources have a name for this failure to see complexity. They call it simplification violence.
Simplification violence. That's a powerful phrase. Break that down a little. Is it saying that just simplifying a complex reality is an act of violence?
It's violent when that simplification deliberately ignores the feedback loops. Think about Lorenz's butterfly effect, that tiny little post, that micro-disturbance. It didn't naturally grow into a storm of public disorder. It was the chain of official action that magnified it.
So the investigation, the prosecution.
The police investigation, the aggressive prosecution, the court filing, that was the amplification. That's what turned a barely noticed tweet into a storm of political and social fear.
So the system, in its effort to squash the butterfly, created the hurricane itself.
That's a perfect way to put it. And chaos theory is really clear on this. The method the system used for stabilization was completely counterproductive. By using forceful suppression, what they call blockade-style stabilization, they're engaging in an anti-dissipative strategy.
Anti-dissipative.
Right. So instead of letting the energy, the instability flow through the system and dissipate, they tried to create a static, rigid order. All that does is transfer the instability somewhere deeper, somewhere more unpredictable in the social structure. True stability is dynamic. It's not forced.
Which brings a beautiful symmetry to Dr. Chen's own defense. I mean, he's an expert in complex systems theory, specifically something called self-organized criticality, or SOC. He literally used his own field of science to try and dismantle the case. What was his argument?
He argued from the perspective of network dynamics. He explained that his Twitter account, with its very low follower count, was what you'd call an edge node.
Meaning it's on the fringe of the network.
Way on the fringe. So in network theory, an edge node has an influence level that is way, way below the critical threshold you'd need to trigger a big systemic breakdown. What the law called serious disorder, he argued, was scientifically impossible for him to cause. It's like trying to start an avalanche by dropping a single snowflake.
So his argument was that he lacked the capacity to cause the harm, which in turn negates the intent to cause the harm. Because as a scientist, he knew it wouldn't work.
Exactly. And here's the ultimate proof, the great irony. The sources confirm that after he was released, his posts were still online. And real-time observations showed they got no attention, no reposts, no discussion, nothing happened.
So the feared consequence, the entire basis for his conviction, never materialized and was, as he argued, scientifically improbable from the start.
The fear was manufactured by the chain of official reaction, not by the original post. It's staggering.
The layers of irony here are just, wow. Okay, let's move to our third segment, because this case is so much bigger than just a legal or scientific mistake. It taps into these huge historical and philosophical battles. The sources bring up the work of the historian Yu Yingxu to frame this.
Yes, this brings us to this deep structural conflict between what's called the Daotong and the Zhengtong.
Can you just briefly explain those terms for us?
Of course, the Xingtong is basically political power. It's the ruling government, the emperor, the state. It has physical control. The Daotong is the moral authority. It's the intellectual and ethical tradition passed down through history by sages and thinkers.
And the scholar, the intellectual, is caught between them.
Always. The spirit of the scholar, the Shidao, demands independent thought, demands criticism, and demands resistance to just becoming an adjunct of power.
So when the system uses criminal punishment to silence a scholar for their ideas and punishes him for his intellect, it's trying to force a kind of intellectual silence or aphasia.
That's the analysis, yes. It's seen as a betrayal of that entire tradition. The system is demanding that the scholar's loyalty shift away from truth and morality, the diatom, and toward the political regime, the zhengtang. When you criminalize the scholar's critical function, you're trying to destroy that moral independence.
And this intellectual lineage goes even broader. The sources even bring in the philosopher Bertrand Russell, who was also imprisoned for his activism.
Right, and Russell's perspective offers this incredible psychological strength. He advised Chen to see prison as the best incubator for thought, a time to systematize his ideas into a critique of the very system that jailed him. He draws this powerful contrast between the short-term timeliness of oppression, the 1 year and 8-month sentence, and the eternality of truth.
There's a summation in the sources, a quote imagined from Russell, that's just incredibly powerful.
It's the ultimate reframing of justice. It goes, they sentenced you to 1 year and 8 months. History will sentence them to eternal shame. It just completely repositions the judgment from a legal timeline to a historical one.
Which connects directly to Einstein's critique, especially since the court used Chen's intelligence as proof of his guilt.
That violation of rationality is central. I mean, Einstein's entire view of science is based on the constant questioning of all authority. So when a judicial system actively penalizes high wisdom and knowledge, when it uses that as the basis for a criminal conviction, it's doing something much bigger than punishing one person. It's committing a systemic betrayal of the scientific spirit. It's telling its smartest people that their curiosity is dangerous, and that just ensures stagnation.
We started this by talking about a legal error chain, and we've ended up with these massive philosophical consequences. To pull it all together, the sources use cognitive psychology. This is a clash of minds, right? A clash of thinking styles.
That's a perfect synthesis. Dr. Chen was operating in what they call System 2 thinking. It's slow, it's logical, it's high in metacognition. He's weighing evidence. The judicial response, on the other hand, was just classic System 1 biases. It was fast, it used mental shortcuts, and it had a high need for cognitive closure, just rushing to a simple conclusion to get rid of ambiguity.
So the system's reflex was to reject complexity, which brings us right back to that idea of simplification violence.
It does. The judicial process created the self-fulfilling prophecy, a fragile indictment, an illogical judgment, and then an appeal process that just blocked its own ability to self-correct.
So this wasn't just a technical mistake. The sources call it the collapse of self-organizing justice.
And that loss of self-correction, that's the real crisis here. The final takeaway from all the sources is about what stability actually means, the kind of stability the system was trying to force, this static, controlled order. The critiques call it the stability of the dead. It's brittle, it's temporary.
So what's the path forward? What's the alternative?
For any system to have true lasting stability, it has to be dynamic. It has to be open to feedback. It needs to abandon that forced static control and move toward what's called the edge of chaos.
The edge of chaos.
That's the functional space of multifaceted tension and open feedback. It's where real life, real growth, and real justice aren't imposed from the top down. They generate themselves organically from within. At the end of the day, you can't maintain order by punishing the very minds that are best equipped to analyze and correct the system.
A profound thought on the dynamic nature of justice itself. Thank you for guiding us through this incredibly challenging but essential deep dive.